Avery Sinclair stands alone, not as a victim, but as a judge. They see a black woman. What they don't see is power. Deputy Mason Briggs moves in. No questions, no respect, just a wall of authority dressed in bias. He blocks her path, takes her badge without care, tells her, without saying a word, "You don't belong here." But what he doesn't know is, she's not just here to observe justice. She is justice. Avery Sinclair isn't just another face in the hallway. She's a federal judge, and they just assaulted her in her own courthouse. This isn't just resistance. It's the start of a reckoning. Avery Sinclair lights the match, and nothing can stop the fire. Don't blink. History is being made. Drop your city and time in the comments, because today changes everything. And if you believe in justice, hit subscribe. Stay with us. The real story is just getting started. Chapter 1. The walk to the courthouse. The city moved like it always did, indifferently. Charleston's morning sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps, illuminating the white stone columns like a monument to justice. Flags rippled softly in the breeze, proud and oblivious. The people passing by were busy with phones, briefcases, routines. No one paused to notice the woman climbing the steps. But she noticed everything. Avery Sinclair didn't just walk. She moved like memory. Slow, deliberate, weighted with things that should have been left behind but never were. Her navy blazer cut through the pale light. Her leather heels struck the marble like punctuation. The silver coils in her hair shimmered with defiance. She carried no entourage, no robe, no ceremony, just her badge tucked inside her portfolio, and the quiet rage of a woman who had given her life to a system that would rather forget she existed. Inside, the courthouse buzzed with activity. A protest case was on the docket today, civil rights violations by officers during last year's demonstration. Heavy press, national attention. Avery was scheduled to preside, but no one recognized her at the entrance. Not yet. She approached the security checkpoint like she had 100 times before. But something felt different. There was a tension in the air, an invisible charge, like the moment before a thunderstorm cracks the sky. Then she saw him. Deputy Mason Briggs. His posture was stiff. His uniform was pressed with military precision. His eyes, when they landed on her, said everything before his mouth did. He didn't see a judge. He didn't see authority. He saw what he wanted to see. "Ma'am," he said, lifting a hand like a stop sign, "gonna need you to step aside." Avery stopped, calmly. "Is there a problem?" "No badge, no ID displayed. You can't just walk in." She reached into her blazer and pulled out her credentials, flipping them open. The federal seal caught the light. Briggs took them without looking, without permission, and slid them into his pocket. "I'd like that returned," she said. "You in a rush, sweetheart?" The word dropped like spit on concrete. A younger female guard nearby glanced up, visibly uncomfortable, but she said nothing. No one ever did. "I need to get to courtroom 3. Avery replied, her voice sharp now. "I am presiding," Briggs smirked. "Everyone's got a story. Let's run a check. Come with me." Before she could speak again, his hand closed around her upper arm. Firm, unnecessary, a power move. He led her down a side hallway, away from the main flow of bodies and cameras, into the screening room. A cold, windowless box meant for silence and shame. There was a steel chair, a scanning cart, a pair of electric clippers. Avery's heart thudded once in her chest. She didn't sit. "You have no legal cause to detain me." "You're acting suspicious." "That's not probable cause." "It is to me." He leaned in close. "That badge you flashed doesn't mean anything here." Then 2 more officers stepped in. One took her wrist, the other gripped her shoulder. Avery didn't scream. She didn't fight. She stared forward as if locking eyes with every woman who had ever been in that room before her. Briggs grabbed the clippers. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice low. "Standard protocol. You could be hiding something in that mop." The clippers buzzed to life. The first coil fell, then another, and another. She felt the cold air on her scalp, the vibration against her skull. She watched pieces of herself fall to the tiled floor like dying leaves, but she didn't flinch. She didn't blink. "Looks better already," one officer chuckled. "Now you look presentable," Briggs said. Avery sat in silence, but inside her chest something had ruptured. Not fear, not shame, purpose. When it was over, Briggs opened the door and gestured lazily. "You're free to go. Courtroom's that way." She stood, took her badge back without asking, walked out without a word, through the hall, through the glances and whispers. Her scalp burned, her breath was tight, but her steps were steady, because what they didn't know, what they couldn't imagine, was that she wasn't there to file a complaint. She wasn't a witness, or a plaintiff, or a victim. She was the judge, and she was about to take the bench. Chapter 2. Unrecognized Authority. The hallway felt colder than before. Her shoes echoed against the tile, but no one spoke. Clerks turned away when they saw her. The security staff averted their eyes. The silence was not respectful. It was loaded. Like everyone had just witnessed something and decided to pretend they hadn't. Avery didn't stop. She passed two junior associates who stiffened as she approached. One of them, a young black woman, lowered her gaze to the floor, ashamed for reasons Avery understood too well. They all saw what happened. No one had stopped it. But now, they were watching her walk forward anyway. At the end of the corridor, twin doors stood tall and polished, etched with the seal of the United States District Court. Normally, Avery would enter from the private chamber behind the bench. Her robe would be waiting. The protocol would be preserved. But today, that didn't matter. Today, she needed them to see her. As she reached for the doors, the courtroom beyond hummed with energy, lawyers murmuring, cameras adjusting, shoes shuffling against marble. The protest brutality case was scheduled to begin. Everyone expected a judge, robed and ready, to emerge from behind the bench. Instead, Avery pushed both doors open from the front. The room froze. Every head turned. At first, there was confusion, then a slow, dawning shock. People began to realize the woman they had just seen escorted away like a suspect was now walking up to the judge's seat, unrobed, unannounced, unapologetic. Avery's scalp was uneven, patches of silver still clinging stubbornly where the clippers hadn't finished. But she didn't hide it. She let the light catch it, let it burn into memory. One by one, the attorneys and court staff rose to their feet, some reluctantly, some with mouths slightly open. The bailiff, the same man who had cut her hair just minutes ago, stood frozen by the side exit. When she locked eyes with him, he didn't move. He didn't blink. Avery didn't flinch. She walked past him, her steps precise, the room utterly silent. Behind the bench, her robe lay folded across the chair. She didn't ask for help. She didn't wait for ceremony. She lifted it herself. The black fabric slid across her shoulders like armor being reforged. Her fingers lingered at the collar, steady. When she turned to face the courtroom, she didn't look at the bailiff again. Not yet. Her voice, when it came, was crisp and clear. "Is the docket ready?" The court clerk, a young man with trembling hands, nodded. Yes, Your Honor." She sat. The leather groaned beneath her, and the courtroom, for the first time that morning, took a collective breath. "We will begin today with preliminary testimony on Case 2371F, Avery said, her tone unwavering. "United States versus Charleston Police Department, charges abuse of power, excessive force, and civil rights violations." The response came as a quiet chorus. "Yes, Your Honor." Attorneys shuffled in their chairs. Some were wide-eyed, others visibly angry, angry that she was still standing, angry that she had not broken. She ignored them. "Call your first witness." A uniformed officer took the stand, mid-30s, clean cut, hands folded tightly in his lap. He looked like a man trying not to sweat. He was there to testify about an incident where a protester, an elderly war veteran, had been shoved to the ground, breaking 2 ribs. Avery leaned forward. She asked no questions. Not yet. Her eyes scanned the room as the testimony unfolded. She saw Deputy Mason Briggs near the exit, shifting from foot to foot. His hands twitched at his belt. He looked like he wanted to disappear. He wouldn't get that chance. After the second witness, Avery called for a recess. People stood in confusion. Lawyers whispered. Reporters tapped frantically on phones, but Avery stayed seated. Only her clerk, 2 officers, and Briggs remained. She looked at him, finally, and her voice cut like glass. "Deputy Briggs," he froze. "Step forward." His mouth opened. Your Honor?" "You heard me." He moved like a man walking toward his own ending. "State your name for the record." He blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Mason Briggs. How long have you worked as a bailiff in this courthouse?" 14 years. She tapped a pen once, twice, then leaned in. "And in those 14 years, how many women have you assaulted in that screening room?" The color drained from his face. Your Honor, I didn't know." "That's not what I asked." He looked around. No one came to save him. "How many complaints have been filed against you?" I don't know." "Wrong," she said, voice sharp as steel. 12. 12 formal complaints. All buried, all dismissed. Because you hid behind procedure and protocol." He stammered. "I didn't know who you were." "And that's the problem, isn't it?" she said. "You thought I was no one. Just another black woman to humiliate. You didn't even ask my name." Silence. "You assaulted a federal judge in her own courthouse, and now you are under criminal investigation." She turned to the 2 officers near the door. "Escort Deputy Briggs into custody. Separate from general population. Formal charges to follow." The cuffs were already ready. "No, wait," Briggs stammered. "You can't." But he was wrong. She already had. Chapter 3. Stripped and silent. The cuffs clinked against Mason Briggs's wrists as the officers led him out of the courtroom. No one clapped, no one cheered, they just watched. The silence wasn't hollow. It was heavy, full of something deeper than satisfaction, reckoning. As the door shut behind him, the spell broke. Papers rustled. Shoes scuffed quietly. People whispered, but it was different now. Their eyes weren't just on the case. They were on Avery Sinclair, still robed, still seated, still in control. But the weight of it all had not lifted. Not yet. She sat still for a moment longer, her hands gently folded atop the bench. Her pulse hadn't slowed. Her scalp still ached from the clippers. But none of that mattered. "Court is adjourned for recess," she said calmly. "We resume in 30 minutes. The gavel dropped once, and the courtroom began to empty. Back in her chambers, the silence was suffocating. She didn't sit. She stood in front of the mirror near the wash basin, staring at the woman looking back at her. Her robe was still on, draped like armor, but beneath it she felt exposed. Her scalp was patchy, uneven, the silver strands she had nurtured for years, gone. She reached up and touched the raw patch above her left ear, fingers grazing the sensitive skin. A part of her wanted to scream, another part wanted to laugh, bitter, sharp. The system had tried to strip her bare, but it had only peeled back the surface. What was left was fire. There was a knock. She turned. Her court clerk stood in the doorway, nervous, eyes darting. "Your Honor, you have a visitor." "Who?" "She says she's an intern." Jasmine Reed Avery nodded. "Send her in." Jasmine was young, early 20s. Her glasses were slightly fogged from rushing, and her fingers trembled as she held the door. Judge Sinclair, I saw what happened," this morning outside the screening room." Avery didn't speak. Jasmine stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know what to do. I should have said something. I was scared." Still, Avery said nothing. Then she nodded once. "Thank you for telling me." "I didn't stop it." "No," Avery replied quietly. "But you're speaking now. That matters." Jasmine swallowed hard. If you need me to testify, I will." Avery looked at her for a long time. Then, slowly, placed her hand over the young woman's. No words, just warmth. Outside, the courthouse was no longer calm. Word had spread about the arrest, about Avery. The video from the screening room had leaked. Phones buzzed in the gallery. Reporters huddled near exits. Something was shifting fast, and when Avery returned to the courtroom, it was fuller than before. People weren't just watching a trial now. They were watching a moment, a tipping point. She walked in, alone. No announcement, no ceremonial introduction. Still, the entire room stood. Even those who once laughed at Briggs's crude remarks. Even those who had looked away. As Avery took her seat, the prosecutor rose. "Your Honor, the next witness is present and ready to testify." "Proceed." The door opened and in walked a man in his mid-40s. Strong frame, graying beard, calloused hands. He moved with a quiet dignity that didn't need to be explained. He was introduced as Deshaun Carter, a warehouse foreman. He took the stand, raised his right hand, swore the oath. Then he began to speak. His voice was rough, but steady. "My son was 17, he said. He wasn't loud, wasn't armed, just stood with a sign at a peaceful protest." A pause. 3 officers took him down. One of them knelt on his throat, crushed his windpipe. "My boy survived, but he still can't speak." The room was silent. Avery didn't blink. "We begged for medics," Deshaun continued. "We were told he was faking. The footage came out a week later. Still, none of them were disciplined." His voice cracked now. "I just want to know it meant something, that someone is finally listening." Avery leaned forward, not as a judge, but as someone who knew exactly what it meant to be silenced. "You've been heard," she said softly. After the witness stepped down, the courtroom fell into a strange stillness. The prosecutor requested a short recess. Avery granted it with a nod. But she didn't leave the bench. Not right away. The robe hung heavy on her shoulders. The system was bending, cracking, not breaking yet, but close. She stared at the gallery, at the people who once ignored her, now unable to look away. This wasn't just a case anymore. It was a mirror. And everyone was starting to see themselves in it. Chapter 4. The Badge. They ignored. Outside, the crowd had doubled. What began as murmurs and headlines had become something louder, an energy building around the courthouse like a brewing storm. Reporters stood on concrete barriers, microphones raised. Protesters gathered with handmade signs. Some read, "Protect Black Women," 12 complaints, 0 action. Justice starts now. Inside, the marble walls couldn't block the sound anymore. Even with the door shut, Avery Sinclair could feel the pressure of 1,000 eyes, some hopeful, others hostile. But none of them would look away now, not after what they saw. Back in her chambers, the light felt harsher than before. The robe, still draped across her shoulders, didn't feel like armor today. It felt like a reminder of all the weight she carried into that courtroom every single time. On her desk lay a file folder marked Confidential Internal Records. It hadn't been there that morning. She didn't know who left it, but she knew exactly what it was. She flipped it open slowly, and there it was, 12 complaints, all filed against Deputy Mason Briggs over the last 15 years, all dismissed, all signed off by the same name, Judge Leonard Banks, her former mentor, her sponsor, the man who once told her, "You don't just belong on the bench, Avery, you redefine it." But now, His signature lived beneath every cover-up, stamped with bureaucratic coldness, unsubstantiated. No action required. Lack of corroboration. Buried paper by paper, voice by voice. Justice delayed to preserve appearances. Abuse tolerated in the name of order. At the back of the file, one memo stood out, different in tone. It wasn't sanitized. It was blunt. Briggs may be rough around the edges, but he keeps order, especially with certain groups. Best to leave well enough alone. Judge Leonard Banks, 2018. Avery's hands trembled as she read it. There it was. The truth they never said out loud. Finally written down. She looked up at her own reflection again. This time she didn't see the scars or the missing strands of silver. She saw purpose. There was a knock at the door. "Your Honor," her clerk said quietly, "there's someone here from the Department of Justice. He says it's urgent." Avery stood. "Send him in." The man was in a gray suit, early 40s, crisp but not flashy. He carried a sealed envelope. "Judge Sinclair, I'm with the Office of Civil Rights. We've received the footage from this morning. It's been circulating across networks, CNN, MSNBC, even congressional inboxes." She nodded once. "We're initiating an immediate investigation," he continued. "Not just into Deputy Briggs, but into prior suppression of complaints. This courthouse is officially under federal review." Avery didn't react. She had nothing left for shock. He hesitated. "Also, you should know, the Senate Judiciary Committee has requested your written statement." "About judicial oversight failures?" He nodded. She gave a small, cold smile. "Of course they have. Now that the cameras are rolling." He paused. "Judge Sinclair, this isn't just a case anymore. This is national." She said nothing. He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "One more thing," he added. "We've confirmed 3 resignations this morning, 2 retired judges, 1 former district attorney, all citing health reasons." "Not surprising," she murmured. "They're running scared." "No," Avery said, folding the file closed. "They're cleaning house before it burns." Back in the courtroom, the mood had shifted again. The gallery was full, but it wasn't the same silence. It was sharper now. Electric. When Avery stepped through the door and returned to the bench, she didn't need to say a word. Everyone stood, out of respect, out of fear, out of recognition, and this time, even the ones who once laughed behind her back didn't hesitate. She sat down slowly and tapped the gavel once. "Let the record show," she said evenly, "that the court is no longer interested in protecting institutions at the expense of individuals. We are no longer pretending silence is neutrality." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Avery opened the confidential file and placed a copy at both the defense and prosecution tables. "These are the complaints filed against Deputy Briggs, along with documentation showing deliberate suppression and judicial negligence." The lead defense attorney, slick suit, slick hair, stood quickly. "Your Honor, we object to this being introduced without—" "Sit down," she said without raising her voice. He sat. "You may proceed with your next witness." The room obeyed, because the game had changed. Chapter 5. She takes the bench. For the first time in her career, Avery Sinclair wasn't just presiding over a case. She was leading a movement. The courtroom no longer felt like a chamber of routine procedure. It had become something else, a battlefield, where each testimony was a strike, each document a blow, each silence a scar revealed. As the next witness prepared to take the stand, the air thickened again. Not with fear, but with anticipation. Everyone could feel it. Something bigger was unfolding. The doors opened. A woman in her mid-50s entered the room, sharply dressed in a tailored black blazer and modest heels. Her steps were sure, her gaze steady. Short-cropped curls framed her angular face, and a pair of wire-rimmed glasses rested low on her nose. She looked like someone who had once been invisible and had grown tired of it. She was sworn in. The prosecutor approached. "Please state your name and prior position." She adjusted the mic. "My name is Vanessa Moore. I served as record supervisor at this courthouse for 8 years. Before that, I worked front desk operations for 10. "And during that time," the prosecutor asked, "were you made aware of any formal or informal complaints filed against Deputy Mason Briggs?" Vanessa's jaw tightened. "Yes, too many to count." The courtroom stirred. Avery leaned forward. "Can you estimate how many formal complaints?" 12. "That I know were filed officially." "And informal?" "Easily twice that." "And what happened to those complaints?" Vanessa didn't answer right away. She looked to Avery, her voice trembling, not with fear, but with something closer to fury. They were mishandled, labeled resolved, when they weren't. Some disappeared entirely. "Who gave those instructions?" the prosecutor asked. Another long pause. Then Vanessa answered clearly, "Judge Leonard Banks." The name hit the room like thunder. Even the gallery flinched. Judge Banks, respected, retired, mentor to many, including Avery. The prosecutor continued, "Why would he suppress those complaints?" Vanessa swallowed hard. "Because he said bringing them forward would damage the courthouse's image, that it would make the court look weak, that people needed to believe in order." Avery felt something in her chest twist. Not rage, but confirmation. Because she had heard those exact words before. From Banks. Back when she was young and hopeful and foolish enough to believe the system would protect people like her. She had believed him. And now she was watching his lies unravel, one sentence at a time. The gallery buzzed as Vanessa stepped down. Reporters typed furiously. One woman near the back clutched her chest, mouthing, "Thank you." Avery called for recess. Again, no one moved quickly. The room held its breath with her. In her chambers, Avery removed the robe and hung it carefully on the wooden stand. It looked different now. Not heavy, not suffocating, just necessary. A knock. Her clerk entered, quiet as ever. "Your Honor, there's someone asking to speak with you." "Who is it?" "He says his name is Curtis Walker, a reverend. Says he knew your father." That made her pause. Avery nodded. "Let him in." Reverend Curtis Walker stepped in like he carried the weight of a congregation on his shoulders. His beard was fully silver, his eyes both kind and tired. He didn't say much at first. He just stood, hands clasped in front of him. "I won't take much of your time, Judge," he said softly. "I just came to say, we're outside." "We?" He handed her a folded list. Names, numbers, notes scribbled in pen. "Some of the folks out there? They've been through it too. Victims of Briggs, of others like him. Never called to testify. Never asked what happened. But they're ready now." She stared at the paper. "How many of these are new?" "Most. Some go back a decade. Some were told, flat out, it wasn't worth reporting. That nothing would change." Avery looked up. "They were wrong." Curtis nodded, smiling faintly. "They are now." When Avery returned to the bench, the courtroom was packed. Word had spread. Live streams, viral footage, and now live coverage on major networks. She stepped behind the bench and looked out, not just at lawyers and defendants, but at everyday people, survivors, students, parents, strangers who had driven hours just to be present. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her presence was the gavel. "We are ready to proceed." The next witness was called, unexpected, a man in his late 50s, limping slightly, wearing a simple charcoal gray suit. He took the oath with quiet grace and introduced himself. "My name is Marshal Quentin Price. I served with the U.S. Marshal's Office, stationed in this courthouse from 2004 to 2012. He adjusted the mic. "I saw a lot back then. and I kept quiet because I didn't want to be seen as the angry black officer. But I can't stay silent anymore. Chapter 6. The first crack in the wall. The courtroom, once cold and procedural, now pulsed with something new. Truth. Not the kind filed neatly in case folders, not the kind edited for legal arguments, but truth as people lived it, as they bled for it, as they were silenced by it. Marshal Quentin Price sat at the witness stand, his back straight despite the limp, his voice steady despite what it carried. "I served in this courthouse for 8 years, he began. I saw Deputy Briggs do things that made me uncomfortable. Disrespect, over-policing, racial profiling, but I didn't say anything. I told myself it wasn't my place." He glanced at Avery, meeting her gaze. "I should have spoken up. I regret not doing it sooner." She didn't nod. She didn't smile. She just listened, like his confession deserved no praise, only space. "By 2010, he continued, Briggs wasn't just aggressive. He was dangerous. I filed a memo with Internal Affairs. It disappeared." Gasps rippled across the gallery. I asked about it. I was told, quote, "He's the kind of man we want handling difficult people." Avery closed her eyes briefly. There it was again, the coded language of a system that believed brutality was order, that silence was protection, that black pain was a tool to keep control. Marshall leaned in. "I left this courthouse not because of the job, but because of what it was doing to me, what I had to ignore just to keep my badge. But when I saw what happened to Judge Sinclair, when I saw that video, I knew I couldn't stay quiet another day." A long silence followed. No cross-examination came, no defense objection, just the weight of what had been buried now laid bare. After he stepped down, the gallery shifted. People whispered, not in gossip, but in realization. They were watching a machine break from the inside. The next name was called. A man in his 60s, thin frame, thick glasses. He moved slowly, holding his rib cage with one hand. He took the stand. "My name is Walter Ellis," he said. "In 2011, I was arrested here for shouting, just shouting. My daughter's case had been dismissed. I raised my voice and Briggs slammed me into a wall. Broke 2 ribs. He looked around the room. I filed a complaint. Right over there, front desk. The report said I tripped and fell, and I never came back." His voice shook. "But I'm here now." Avery didn't speak. She didn't need to. The room had already heard enough. Recess was called again, but no one really left. Most stayed in their seats. Some cried quietly. Others stared at the floor like they'd just realized they were part of something they didn't fully understand. The mask had come off. Not just Briggs, not just Banks, but the whole structure. And Avery. She was no longer just presiding over a courtroom. She was rewriting it. Back in chambers, her clerk entered with quiet urgency. "Your Honor," she said, "the Senate Judiciary Committee has formally requested a statement. They're drafting a report on judicial oversight breakdown tied to the Briggs incident." Avery gave a dry smile. "Now that the cameras are on them, they care. There's more," the clerk added. 3 federal officials just resigned this morning. 2 judges. 1 former DA cleaning house," Avery muttered, "before they have to answer for the mess." She stood, hands braced on her desk. "Tell the attorneys to prepare closing arguments." "But, Your Honor," the clerk blinked. "This isn't over yet." "No," Avery said. "But we're about to see who's still willing to defend the system that let this happen." When court reconvened, you could feel the shift. People weren't just here for a hearing. They were here for history. Even the defense looked rattled. Avery took her seat, this time without the robe. She folded it neatly beside her. Today, she didn't need it. She tapped the gavel once. "Before we proceed with arguments, I'm entering into the record new material." She gestured to her clerk, who handed thick folders to each table. These are the full records of prior complaints against Deputy Briggs, internal memos, email correspondences, and the signatures of every official who dismissed them. The defense attorney stood to object, but Avery cut him off. "Sit down." He did. "This court is no longer protecting titles," she said. "Only truth." And with that, she turned to the gallery. "Let the record show. This is what justice sounds like when it finally speaks." Chapter 7. 12 Voices. The courtroom no longer felt like a room. It felt like a wound. Open, raw, exposed. And the people sitting inside weren't just watching a trial. They were watching themselves. Some shifted uncomfortably. Some leaned forward like witnesses to a fire. Others sat still, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, afraid to admit that maybe they'd known all along. Avery Sinclair didn't need to say a word. The truth was speaking for her now. As the prosecutor prepared her next motion, someone stood in the far corner of the gallery. "Your Honor," the man said, voice unsure, hand slightly raised. Avery turned. "State your name." "Louis Bryant," he said, stepping forward. "I'm not on the list, but I need to speak." There was a pause. Avery nodded. He stepped into the open space near the jury box. He held no mic, no folder, no legal training, just history clenched in his fists. "In 2011, I was arrested in this very building. I raised my voice when my daughter's case was dismissed. Deputy Briggs slammed me into the wall." He tapped his rib cage. "Broke 2 ribs, filed a complaint the next morning." He looked around. "They told me I tripped. That's what the report said. That I fell." A hush fell. I never came back. Until now. He stepped back. No applause. Just silence. And then, a woman stood. "I was strip-searched for a parking citation." A man raised his hand. "He told me, 'People like you should be lucky we let you in here at all.'" Another. "He mocked my accent in front of my children." One by one, they rose. 5, 10, 15. Avery counted them without meaning to. 12, the number that had haunted every page of that internal report. But now they weren't just ink on paper. They had faces, names, voices, and they would not be erased again. Avery didn't interrupt. She didn't direct. She just sat. Let it rise. Not like chaos, like testimony, like air finally released after years of being held in someone's chest. The court reporter's fingers struggled to keep up. The defense remained frozen, their case collapsing beneath the weight of what could no longer be denied. When the room finally quieted again, a teenage girl near the front stood slowly. She said nothing, just pulled off her hoodie. Her head was shaved, patchy, uneven, like Avery's. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Avery nodded once. Something passed between them. An understanding that went deeper than words. Later that night, Avery stood on her porch, robe gone, shoes off, the cool air washing over her like something close to peace. Her scalp still itched, her body ached, but her spirit felt like it had stopped holding its breath for the first time in days. She didn't scroll her phone, didn't read the headlines, didn't answer the texts. She just stood there and let herself breathe. Tomorrow, she knew, would bring more weight, more fire, more press, more politics. But tonight, this one night, she let herself feel what it was like to be seen. Not as a problem, not as an exception, not as a threat, but as a judge, a woman, a leader, a survivor. Back inside, a folder sat unopened on her kitchen counter. She would read it later. It held the final names of every official who had covered for Briggs, every stamp of silence, every endorsement of abuse. Tomorrow she would bring it to court, and tomorrow she would bring it to light, because they had chosen to bury the truth. But she had chosen to dig it up, and now it belonged to everyone. Chapter 8. The Monroe Mandate. The morning sky over Charleston was gray, not cloudy, heavy, like something was waiting to fall. Inside the courthouse, the wait had already started. Security was tighter. Reporters swarmed every entrance. Protesters lined the steps, some silent, some chanting, many holding signs that said, "We believe Avery." 12 complaints. No accountability. Protect black women. Period. But Avery Sinclair wasn't watching them. She was sitting at her desk, alone. In her chambers, everything felt still, unnaturally so. On the desk sat a folder marked, "For courtroom entry. Immediate action." Inside was the beginning of something bold, a new policy barely finalized. Pages fresh off the printer, warm to the touch, but years in the making. She slid the papers into a leather binder. Then she stood and walked out to finish what had begun. In the courtroom, every seat was filled. This time it wasn't just locals. Reporters from the Washington Post, the New York Times, CNN, even BBC were huddled in the back rows. Cameras weren't allowed in, but live text updates were flying. Screens glowed, fingers typed. And in the front row sat something that meant more than all of it. A line of black law students, shoulder to shoulder, notebooks in hand. Watching Avery like she was a future they'd been told wasn't possible. She stepped to the bench without her robe. She didn't need it anymore. Everyone rose before the clerk even spoke. "Be seated," Avery said, her voice clear and sharp. "We are not just proceeding, we are moving forward." The defense looked pale. The prosecution looked resolute. Avery turned to the gallery. "Before we enter closing arguments," she said, "this court will enter into the record a new proposal." She lifted the binder. "This is the Monroe Mandate." She let the words hang, let the weight of it settle. "A policy for all courthouse personnel, security, and law enforcement under this jurisdiction. Effective immediately." People leaned in. Phones hovered inches above laps. "It mandates comprehensive anti-bias training, mandatory psychological screening, routine evaluations, and a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory conduct." She scanned the room. "This is not just a reaction to what was done to me. It's a protection for those who come after me, for the ones who never made it to the bench, for the ones who never made it past the door." She tapped the gavel once. "I will bring this to the district, to the circuit, to the Senate if I have to, because what happened here, what happened to me, should never happen again, to anyone." There was no applause, but there was movement, a slow, silent rise in the gallery. One by one, people stood, lawyers, clerks, journalists, students. Even the bailiff, not Briggs, the replacement, straightened, his hand briefly resting on his chest. It wasn't ceremony, it was recognition. After court adjourned for the day, Avery returned to her office, ready to take a breath. But her clerk knocked again, this time breathless. "Your Honor, the White House just released a statement. The president is watching." Avery blinked. "They're calling the Monroe Mandate the most important judicial reform proposal of the decade." She said nothing, not because she didn't care, but because she didn't do it for them. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low behind the courthouse, Avery stood on the steps. Not alone this time. Her sister Nayan stood beside her intern Jasmine behind her, Reverend Curtis to the right, and behind them, the people, not a crowd, a presence. They didn't chant, they didn't scream. They just stood, silent, steady, together. And Avery stepped forward. "This is not the end," she said. "This is the start." Chapter 9, The Pushback. The next morning didn't begin with sunlight. It began with headlines. "Federal judge assaulted in courthouse, then takes control." "The Monroe Mandate gains momentum nationwide." "Senate eyes emergency hearings on judicial oversight failures." But beneath those headlines, another story was brewing, a quieter one, a calculated one. In the chambers just outside Avery Sinclair's courtroom, a defense team huddled like generals. Phones buzzed, emails flew, language was being shaped, not to defend justice, but to undermine it. They couldn't deny the facts anymore, so they'd attack the face delivering them. Inside the courtroom, the crowd was even bigger than before. The marble walls seemed to vibrate with the weight of what was happening. Avery entered, calm and steady. She took her seat, no robe again, and tapped the gavel once. Court is now in session. Before the prosecution could rise, a sharply dressed man stood from the defense table. Pinstripe suit, late 40s, a voice trained to speak with charm and condescension at the same time. "Your Honor," he said, voice smooth, "before we proceed, the defense would like to file a formal motion." Avery narrowed her eyes. "On what grounds?" "We believe the events of this week may constitute a conflict of interest." There was a murmur through the room. The attorney pressed on. "Given that Your Honor was directly involved in an incident with the accused and the public reaction to that incident, we believe the impartiality of this courtroom has been compromised." Translation: "You were assaulted. Now you're too emotional to judge." Avery stood slowly, not behind the bench, but in front of it. She looked directly at the man trying to remove her from the case. "I was publicly humiliated," she said, "not for what I did, but for who I am." A pause. "And what did I do in response?" Silence. "I took my seat. I upheld the law. I followed every code of conduct. I treated this courtroom with more respect than it ever gave me." The attorney shifted uncomfortably. "You want to talk about bias?" she asked. "Let's talk about 12 ignored complaints. Let's talk about every judge who signed off on them, every official who looked the other way. You want to talk about integrity?" Her voice dropped. "Let's talk about yours." The gallery was dead silent. "You may file your motion," Avery said coldly. "It will be reviewed after this case concludes. Until then, I'm not going anywhere." She returned to the bench. "Prosecution, call your next witness." What followed wasn't just testimony. It was revelation. A former courthouse employee named Denise Talley took the stand. Mid-50s, glasses, composed. Avery recognized her, not from court records, but from old break-room memories. Denise had always been quiet, efficient, unbothered, until now. "Did you ever handle complaints against Deputy Briggs?" the prosecutor asked. Denise nodded. "I logged them, read them, watched them disappear." "Disappear?" She met Avery's eyes. "Judge Leonard Banks personally instructed me to mark some of them as resolved. Others were deleted from the system entirely." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. "Why?" the prosecutor asked. "He said it would shake public trust, that it would make the courthouse look unstable, that it was better to protect the reputation of the system than let people see the cracks." Avery leaned back. There it was again. The rot. Not in mobs, not in violence, but in calm meetings, in emails, in rubber stamps. After Denise stepped down, the courtroom recessed again. Avery didn't move from her chair. She sat there as the voices swirled around her, as the whispers grew, as the message spread. She was still here, still leading, still listening, still refusing to be removed. The court reporter whispered something as she passed the bench. Avery turned. "What was that?" The woman hesitated, then repeated it. "You're not just running this courtroom, Judge Sinclair." She smiled faintly. "You're rewriting it." Chapter 10. Not just justice, reform. By midweek, the courthouse steps no longer looked like government property. They looked like sacred ground. Journalists, law students, pastors, nurses, teachers, veterans, all gathered beneath the stone pillars, quiet and watching. Some held signs. Some clutched notebooks. Some just stood in silence, eyes fixed on the doors, as if waiting for something sacred to emerge. Inside, Avery Sinclair sat alone in her chambers. The Monroe Mandate was spreading. 2 other federal courthouses had adopted interim versions. One circuit judge in Atlanta had reached out, asking for her draft language. A university had requested to teach the case in its next civil rights law module. And a senator from Illinois had called her clerk, twice. But none of that moved her as much as what had just been placed on her desk. A stack of letters, handwritten, folded, some stained by tears, from people who'd never been inside a courtroom, people who didn't have the words but found them anyway. You made me believe again. My mother never saw this day, but I did. Thank you for not sitting down when they told you to. She closed the last one and exhaled, not from relief, from the sheer weight of it all. When she entered the courtroom that afternoon, a ripple moved through the rows. Even those who had come just to spectate stood now, unprompted. Not out of tradition, but out of respect. Her gaze swept the room and found a familiar face in the crowd. Nan, her older sister, not dressed for court, no notes, no briefcase, just presence. Avery nodded once. Nan didn't smile. She only mouthed 2 words. Don't stop. The prosecution introduced its next piece of evidence, a timeline. Each date marked a complaint. Each signature marked a dismissal. Each denial built on top of the last until it resembled something brutal in its symmetry. A pattern of protection, of power choosing power, of silence passed down like law. Avery didn't interrupt. When the timeline was shown to the jury, gasps echoed across the room. Some stared at the wall of dismissals like they were seeing a body count. Then came the final folder, marked in red, pulled from internal archives not meant for public review. Inside was a memo, just one. It read, Briggs has a tendency to be aggressive, especially with minority groups, but he's effective. A deterrent is sometimes worth the discomfort. Signed, Judge Leonard Banks. Avery closed her eyes. Not from pain, from clarity. This wasn't about reforming one man. It was about dismantling the excuse for every man like him. Outside the courtroom, the national conversation was shifting. News segments played reels of Avery walking to the bench, her patchy scalp uncovered. Law blogs dissected every clause of the Monroe Mandate. Even late-night talk shows mentioned her by name. But inside the court, Avery remained the same. Still firm, still deliberate, still unwilling to let performance replace truth. That evening, after court adjourned, Avery walked down the hall. No robe, no escort, just her. As she passed, a janitor paused his sweeping and gave her a quiet fist to his chest. 2 young clerks stopped mid-conversation and straightened, as if caught near a wildfire. And when she entered the elevator, the new security officer, a black woman in her 30s, nodded once, whispering, "Thank you for staying." The next morning, her phone buzzed before sunrise. Her clerk's voice was breathless. "Judge, the White House is calling. They want to schedule a meeting. And CNN just reported that the Senate Judiciary Committee is introducing your mandate for nationwide consideration." Avery paused, staring out her window as the sky turned from steel to gold. "Tell them I'm still in court," she said. "They can wait."
Chapter 11. Quiet doors, loud decisions. By now, the courthouse no longer belonged only to Charleston. It had become a national stage. The street outside was packed. Protesters and press stood shoulder to shoulder, some holding signs, others holding microphones. Above them, a news drone hovered, its tiny blades humming like hornets in orbit. Inside, every hallway was a live wire. Every whisper meant something. Every closed door might hold someone trying to stop what had already begun. Avery Sinclair stood at her window, watching the crowd from behind the curtain. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel safe. She just felt certain. There was a knock. Her clerk entered, nervous as always, but trying to hide it. "There's someone here to see you," she said, "from the Federal Circuit." Avery raised a brow. "Send them in." The man who entered was all smooth lines and silver speech. Victor Remington, Senior Oversight Counsel for the Federal Judicial Review Board, retired judge, white, expensive shoes. He didn't shake hands. "Avery," he said, using her first name without invitation. You've made quite the stir." She didn't respond. He smiled, the kind that never touched his eyes. "We're proud of how you've handled yourself, truly. You've shown restraint, strength, clarity." "And yet," she said calmly, "you're here to stop me." He chuckled. Not at all. We're just concerned about longevity, about sustainability, about how this all reflects on the judiciary." "You mean how it reflects on you?" Silence. He stepped closer. "We're prepared to fast-track you for a circuit promotion, a higher bench, less media, fewer trials, more control. It would allow you to lead reform from a position with more insulation." It was delivered like a gift, but Avery heard it for what it was, a muzzle wrapped in velvet. She shook her head. "No. You don't even want to think it over?" "I've done more than think," she said. "I've lived it. I've bled for it. And I'm not moving upward to make anyone more comfortable. I'm moving forward to make change." He exhaled through his nose, like disappointment masked as patience. "You've made enemies, Avery." "I didn't make them," she said. "I just stopped obeying them." He said nothing after that. He left quietly, his silence louder than his offer. Later that afternoon, she returned to the courtroom. The gallery was standing room only. Students now carried binders labeled Monroe Doctrine. Advocates whispered terms like structural justice. Even members of the press weren't hiding their bias anymore. They were visibly rooting for her. But not everyone was clapping. In the far back, Avery spotted a familiar face. Judge Leonard Banks, her mentor. The one whose signature had buried 12 complaints. He wasn't sitting. He was standing, alone. No robe, no entourage. Just watching. Avery didn't acknowledge him, didn't nod, didn't blink. Let him watch. Let them all watch. That evening in chambers, a new file arrived on her desk. This one came from an anonymous source. No signature, no stamp, just a title on the front, the names they hid. Inside were 14 additional complaints, different courthouses, different officers, same pattern, buried, dismissed, erased, but now, unearthed, attached was a single sticky note. "If you're going to tear it down, here's your hammer." Avery closed the folder. The walls were shaking now, not from protesters, not from storms, but from truth finally pounding on every locked door. And she was the one swinging.
Chapter 12. One by one, they speak by now. The courthouse no longer held quiet. It held presence. Each day, the line outside the courtroom stretched longer. Some arrived with protest signs, others with baby strollers, some in silence, some in grief, some just wanting to be near it, whatever it had become. Because this wasn't just a trial anymore, it was a mirror, and people had come to see who was brave enough to look into it. Inside, Avery Sinclair stood behind the bench, not sitting, not today. She had received the folder the night before. 14 new complaints, hidden in basements, shredded from backups, erased by signatures with titles too high to be questioned. But now they had surfaced, and they came with names, with stories, with fire. She tapped the gavel once. "We are entering a new phase of this proceeding," she announced. "The next testimonies are not officially on the docket, but this court will hear them." A murmur ran through the gallery. The bailiff stepped forward. "Your Honor, are these witnesses verified?" "They are," Avery said. "They were just ignored." The first to take the stand was a janitor. Black, late 60s, quiet eyes. He spoke of hearing screams in the screening room, of being told to clean extra quick, of seeing clumps of hair in the trash bin. "I didn't know who she was," he said, nodding toward Avery. "But I knew what I saw was wrong." Next was a young mother. She had come to court for a custody hearing. Briggs had patted her down in front of her child, made her strip to her bra, told her she looked like trouble. She never filed the complaint. She was afraid it would hurt her case. "I stayed silent because I thought no one would believe me," she said. But I believe her, so I'm here now. Then came a man with no legal background, no job title, just trauma. Briggs had arrested him for loitering in a courthouse he was legally summoned to. He had bruises, a concussion, a charge that was dropped 2 days later. No record remained, but he remembered everything. I kept asking what I did wrong, he said. He told me existing the wrong way. And then came someone unexpected. The courtroom doors opened, and a tall man in a U.S. Marshal uniform stepped forward. Not Quentin Price. Someone new. His name was Andrew Taylor, 58, black, 20 years of federal service, limped slightly. He raised his hand, swore the oath, and said, "I covered for Briggs." The room froze. I didn't file a complaint. I didn't raise a flag. I told myself it wasn't my job, but I saw him throw a man down the stairs once. I watched him mock a Muslim woman's prayer rug. He looked at Avery directly. And when I saw what they did to you, I saw what I allowed. No one moved. Not the jury, not the press, not the defense. Even the defense attorney, the man who once tried to remove Avery from the case, looked down, because something had shifted. This courtroom wasn't just exposing injustice, it was confessing it. Avery stood from the bench, walked to the witness box, and faced the gallery. "This is the power of the record," she said, "not just what gets filed, but what gets remembered." She looked at every person who had spoken. "You were not invisible. You were erased. And this court does not erase people anymore." The room stood again. Not for tradition, not for victory, but for truth. Because one by one they had spoken, and that alone changed everything. But as Avery returned to chambers, a new file waited on her desk. No envelope, no initials. Just one word on the front. Sealed. Inside, a single report, dated 5 years earlier. It detailed a federal investigation, shut down before it began. The subject, Mason Briggs. The reason, too disruptive to the institution. Attached was a handwritten note. "He wasn't acting alone. You're close." Avery sat down. Breath held, eyes locked on the page, because the truth wasn't done revealing itself, and someone had buried it deep. Chapter 13, The Trial of Mason Briggs. The folder sat on her desk for hours before she opened it again. The report inside wasn't just damaging, it was damning. Briggs had been investigated before, by a federal body, a case built, witnesses named, statements taken, and then shut down. No explanation, no audit trail, just one red-inked note at the top of the final page. Contain it. He keeps order. It was signed by Terrence Mahoney. The name twisted something in Avery's stomach. Mahoney wasn't just a former chief district judge. He was the man who had once nominated her for the federal bench, a mentor, a man who called her proof of progress. But now, he was something else entirely, the architect of silence. In court that morning, the tone had changed, not tense, not hostile, just exposed. There were no more games, no more challenges to Avery's seat, no more procedural interruptions. The defense had gone quiet, their table lined with lawyers who suddenly had very little to say. Mason Briggs wasn't in his uniform today. He was in a beige prison jumpsuit, wrists cuffed in front, eyes bloodshot, shoulders hunched not from guilt, but from disbelief that the power was really gone. He sat beside a court-appointed attorney now. The firm that once shielded him had quietly withdrawn representation. Too risky, too late. Avery entered the room, robe folded over one arm. She wore it again today, but not out of formality, out of finality. She sat behind the bench and turned her gaze on Briggs. "Mr. Briggs," she said, "you have been accused of abuse of power, civil rights violations, assault, and obstruction of justice. You may speak before sentencing." He stood, awkward, unfamiliar with the feeling of being beneath someone. I didn't know, he said. I didn't know who you were. The courtroom was stone silent. I thought, he started again. You were just another one of them. Avery's face remained still. People like you always make noise, he mumbled, but it goes away. Avery leaned forward. It's not going away this time. She stood. Mr. Briggs, this court finds you guilty on all charges. You are hereby sentenced to the maximum allowable penalties under federal law. She listed them clearly. 6 years for abuse of power, 5 years for civil rights violations, 1 year for obstruction, 12 years total, no parole, no early release. But then her voice shifted, sharper, deeper, personal. That's the legal part, she said. Now for the human part. Briggs didn't meet her eyes. You spent your career deciding who deserved dignity. You used fear as a weapon, silence as a shield, and you thought your badge made you untouchable. She let the silence hold for a moment. But now, Mr. Briggs, you get to sit in the seat you built for others. The bailiff moved in. The cuffs were locked. Briggs was let out. Not in defiance, not in fury. Just erased. And the courtroom for once didn't move. No one cheered. No one clapped. They just watched. Because this wasn't about celebration. This was about closure. Later that evening, Avery sat in chambers, the courthouse quiet again. The folder remained open beside her, still revealing the rot that had stretched far beyond Briggs. She knew what had to come next. A memo was already drafted. To the Department of Justice. Subject line, criminal referral, former Chief Judge Terrence Mahoney. She would file it in the morning, not for revenge, for record, for history. And outside the courthouse that night, the crowd didn't shout. They lit candles, rows and rows of them, each one held by someone who once thought their voice didn't matter. Now standing beneath the building that once told them so, and watching the lights flicker through the windows, they saw her, Avery Sinclair. No robe, no press, just her, watching back. Chapter 14. Not just a verdict, a warning. The courthouse was packed, every bench, every stair, every inch of wall claimed by someone with eyes wide and breath held, because today wasn't just the close of a trial, it was the beginning of a reckoning, and at the center of it, Judge Avery Sinclair. She stood at the bench, not seated, not shielded, and lifted a thick binder marked in gold foil. The Monroe Mandate, final draft. This court, she said, has witnessed more than testimony. It has uncovered silence, exposed complicity, and pulled the curtain back on how power protects itself. She let her words settle like a verdict. Let the record show. This institution will no longer place reputation above responsibility. She tapped the cover once. The Monroe Mandate is now in effect across all Charleston District Court facilities. It includes mandatory bias screening, complaint transparency, digital preservation of all incident reports, and independent civilian oversight panels. A pause. It will be submitted to the Judiciary Committee today and pushed to every bench that dares call itself fair. She reached into a drawer and held up a second folder. Black, unlabeled, heavier. These are the names of every official who signed off on complaint dismissals, who covered for Deputy Briggs, who chose comfort over conscience. She looked up, straight into the gallery. I'm forwarding these names to the Department of Justice for review, referral, and, if applicable, federal charges. The air shifted. Gasps didn't come from surprise, but relief, because the fear wasn't that nothing would happen. It was that it would end here, and now it wouldn't. She turned toward the defense table, now nearly empty. Let this be a warning, she said, her voice cold as glass. If you buried the truth, I'm digging it up. The courtroom stood, not because they were told to, but because they had to, because something demanded it, not law, not formality, dignity. Avery stepped down from the bench, robe still on her shoulders but open. She walked past every row. People moved out of her way without being asked, not out of fear, but respect. And when she reached the double doors at the rear of the room, she paused, turned, and said, "Justice isn't a ceremony, it's a cost. And I paid it, so the next woman won't have to." The doors opened, flashbulbs went off. But Avery didn't smile, didn't wave. She just walked forward, toward the microphones, the cameras, the calls from Capitol Hill. Behind her, the court staff watched in stunned quiet, and on the marble bench where she had once sat stripped of power, the light from the window now touched only one object, her nameplate, etched in black and silver, still there, unmoved. This medal is proof that justice is not perfect, but it's possible, and it's ours to build. The applause didn't erupt. It rose like a tide, deep, whole, unstoppable. Hours later, Avery sat alone in her hotel room, the medal lying on the nightstand. Her phone buzzed with calls from newsrooms, senators, advocacy groups. She answered none of them. Instead, she looked out the window, watched the city lights blink below, and exhaled. A week later, back in Charleston, a group of middle schoolers gathered in their civics class. Their teacher had shown clips from Avery's testimony, assigned essays about justice. One girl raised her hand. "Do you think she was scared?" The teacher smiled. "Yes, but that's what made her brave." Somewhere, in the break room of a courthouse, a newspaper clipping was taped to the fridge. A photo of Avery, medal around her neck. Someone had written below it in black Sharpie, "She's not just our judge. She's our mirror." Avery Sinclair didn't set out to become a symbol. She set out to do her job, but by standing her ground, she became something more. The moment justice finally looked like all of us. Chapter 15. History has her face. Now the sun rose differently that morning. Not louder, not brighter. Just clearer. As if the sky itself knew that something had changed and there was no going back. Inside her home, Avery Sinclair stood in front of the mirror. No robe, no scarf, no hat. Her hair was short now, clean-shaven, growing back soft in silver waves across her crown. The patchy scars had faded, but she chose not to cover them, because they were part of the story, part of the fight. She ran one hand gently across her scalp and whispered, "This is who I am now." From the hallway, her sister Nayan called out, "They're waiting." Outside, a black SUV waited to escort her. Not to court this time, to Washington, D.C., to the Presidential Medal of Justice ceremony. Her name had been announced 2 weeks ago, but the weight of it hadn't really settled in until now. The invitation, the speech, the cameras. But none of that mattered as much as who would be in the front row. Nan, her intern, Jasmine, Reverend Hill, the teenage girl with the shaved head, the janitor who had once swept up her hair, and somewhere in the crowd, dozens of people who had once been erased now seen because of her. The ceremony was held at the National Gallery of Justice, white marble steps, red carpet, gold-trimmed lectern. But Avery noticed none of it. She stepped onto the stage when her name was called. The room stood, cameras clicked. A hush fell. She looked out at them all and began. "I wasn't supposed to be here," she said, not as pity, as truth. Not because I didn't earn it, not because I didn't qualify, but because for most of my life, rooms like this, systems like this, weren't made for people like me. She let it sit. And when I finally entered them, I was still reminded, at every turn, that I didn't belong. She glanced up, right into the camera. But I stayed. She took a breath. I stood. And I made them see me. She held up the medal in her hand. "This is not mine alone," she said. This belongs to every woman who was told to stay quiet. Every man told justice wasn't for him. Every child who looked at the law and only saw fear. Her voice cracked. Not from weakness, but from completion.